In this video, we're going to discuss the auditor's consideration of internal control. So it all starts with the auditor gaining an understanding of the company's internal controls and how they work and whether they're effective. At that point, the auditor is going to assess whether they can rely on the internal controls. And if the auditor believes they can rely on the internal controls, they're going to perform some tests to see how reliable those controls are. So let's go through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. So understanding the organization's internal control has several parts. First, the auditor needs to know how the controls are designed. If the control is designed well, then that simply means that were the control to actually be used and applied by the right person, then the control would be effective. However, just because the control is designed well doesn't mean that it's being implemented. It might be that no one is applying the internal control, or it might be that the internal control is being applied by the wrong person who doesn't understand how to apply it. So once the auditor has an understanding of the internal control, which they're going to document at each and every step, then they can answer the following question. Can I rely on this entity's internal controls? So if the answer is no, that you've done the assessment, you say, I cannot rely on these internal controls, then you're going to put the control risk at the maximum risk, the highest level of control risk, 100%. Okay, you're going to say, I cannot trust these controls. Long story short, you're going to have to do a lot more substantive testing because you can't rely on the controls. So the control risk is going to be really high. So to keep your audit risk low, you're going to have to basically do more substantive testing. Now, if you decide, yes, I can rely on the internal controls. I've done this assessment. It looks like the internal controls can be used to an extent. Now you're going to do some tests. You're going to test the controls and see, okay, are they in fact working at the extent to which I believe? Okay, and if you find that, okay, I've tested these controls and I found that they are ineffective after testing them, then you're going to set the control risk at a very high level. You're going to say, look, I've tested the controls. I'd initially thought that I could rely on the controls, but I've tested them and found them to be very ineffective. So I'm going to increase control risk. And again, that means you're going to have to do more substantive testing. Whenever you find that you can't rely on the controls as much as you thought, or maybe you can't rely on them at all, then you need to increase the amount of substantive testing. Okay. Now, if you test the controls and find that, hey, the controls are effective, they're working, they're being applied by the right person, then in that case, you can say we have low control risk. Okay, so you can rely on the controls. So because you can rely on the controls and because the controls have been found to be effective, you can reduce the amount of substantive testing and substantive procedures that you're going to conduct throughout the audit.